Hey guys, welcome to Juicy Tea, where I read out the best stories on Reddit, so you don't have to. The funny, shocking, and satisfyingly juicy. Today's video is Sussy Sunday, where we try and find the truth. 2 tampons, maybe my marriage is over. This first post comes from the BestofRedditorUpdates subreddit, posted by Capable Elephant 6355. I, 29 female, have been with my husband, 30 male, for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had any reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me, or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living in the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, if it weren't for the surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted in between the cushions. I pulled it out and saw that it was a tampon. This wouldn't have been so unusual if I hadn't had an IUD that had stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognise the wrapper style. I brought it to my husband's attention, and he didn't seem to understand what it was, let alone why I was holding it, until I told him where I found it, and why I was almost certain that it wasn't mine. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his co-worker Fiona. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his co-workers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband, so I figured it's entirely possible that the tampon had slipped out of her purse whenever he'd driven them, or offered her a ride, so no big deal. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband, but I just couldn't get over it, the way he'd been tucked into the seat, and the way my husband just seemed to have no regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb? I don't know. I did something that I now feel kinda crazy for doing. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one that was almost identical to the one I found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So it was probably the same tampon, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning, this time in my sock drawer. It's like she's leaving you a trail of breadcrumbs, but of tampons. I felt physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair, and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's co-worker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation, I'd talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. What should I do? Relevant comments. Barbie-Girl02 says, OP, before you confront your husband, get more evidence. I can't tell you how many times my dad or my brother just chuck my things in a random drawer because they don't know where they belong, but they still want to help. If the 2 previous tampons, the Cars or Fiona's, are not 100% accounted for, I'd say there's a chance that the one you found in your drawer is one of those. However, it is suspicious. If I were you, before planting a camera that would completely break your husband's trust in the case that he's not cheating, I'd start becoming more unpredictable with my movements. Come home early from work when you can, or go to a girls' night, but come back way earlier than usual. If he's cheating, chances are you'll catch him. Update. Contemplating every possible source of the 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I want to share an update. Shortly after posting on here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the backseat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all of the things that I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared the tampons, save for the one in the backseat that I'd already discarded, and they were a match, just different absorbencies. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or my daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters don't know what they were and where they'd come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona, either effing my husband or effing with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for a Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any change in behaviour, there was none. Our house for any misplaced or foreign items, there were none, or even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and it was partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said it had been nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2 years old, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home, taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that, and my sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice. And at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the third or fourth day, I was just happy to see my nearly healthy child and a husband who was helping her through it. But towards the end of that week, I came home to something strange. The toddler that had left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie that I had never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. What the F? This woman wants you to catch on. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleep suits with a snap across the front long before we had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the butt and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them, so I was bewildered and kind of floored at the thought of someone being around our sick kid without my knowledge. I didn't think twice and went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It'd just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room, and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make any sense of it then, and it hardly seems any clearer now after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that just aren't adding up. Wow, the gaslighting! I personally think he's cheating and that the other woman wants them to be caught. Not sure if it's Fiona or not, but this one's marked as ongoing, so until we get an update, I'll leave it to you guys. Am I wrong for snapping at a friend after I failed to bring a cake to our friend's birthday dinner twice? Our next post comes from the AmItheAsshole subreddit, posted by Deleted. Today is my friend Jerry's birthday. We're colleagues and a few of us decided to get dinner after work to celebrate. The plan was to meet up at the restaurant at 5 as we finish work early on Wednesdays. Before I left for work, I was talking to my other colleague, Ali, who had arranged with a bakery to have a cake made for Jerry. Ali said she didn't have time to collect it because it had to be picked up by 4, right before the bakery closed. I offered to pick it up instead. Ali was very thankful and told me to go to her phone and check her Maps app to get the address. She was rushing around as we were talking, hence why she asked me to get off her phone instead of her doing it instead. I did that and found the address pretty quickly, as it was the last place that she had travelled using her maps. After I got ready for dinner, I went to the bakery and asked for the cake, but they said they had no idea what I was talking about. I called Ali and said I was at insert bakery name and reiterated what happened. Ali got annoyed and said I went to the wrong bakery. She said I went to one of the bakeries where she'd inquired about the cake, but that it was actually another bakery that she'd settled on, and that had made the cake. I don't know how I managed to mess it up, and I apologised profusely. The other bakery was closed by then, so there was no way I could get the cake. Ali then told me to go to the store and get the super moist cherry chip cake because the original birthday cake had cherries in it. I presumed this was unique to this certain store, and that's why the name was so specific. So I went to the store, couldn't find it, asked an employee, and was brought over to the cake mixers. Turned out it's a Betty Crocker cake mix that you have to bake yourself. I texted Ali, it was just after 5 now, and asked how I was supposed to bake the cake and get there for dinner. She said if I made the cake now, I can bring it in just before they leave to get drinks afterwards and join them then. I felt awful for messing up the first cake, so I agreed. I didn't mind skipping dinner if it meant showing up with a cake. I bought it and drove home and started making it. I was panicking, which slowed me down a lot. By the time I was done, it was 6:30 and the cake looked like poop. I rang Ali to make sure they were still at the restaurant, and she said they were at the bar now and to not worry about bringing the cake. I asked why, and she said another coworker told the staff that it was Jerry's birthday and they brought out a cake. I felt defeated and I snapped. I had verbal diarrhea and asked her why she didn't tell me this sooner. Why I had to bake a cake instead of buying an already baked one, and if she'd even covered for me as to why I wasn't there. In hindsight, I know I'm a complete idiot for baking the cake. I just felt so poopy about messing up the first one and was in a frenzy. Okay, I can understand OP panicking after feeling like they messed up, being told to grab a specific cake only to find out it's a premix, panicking and buying it on the spot and trying to make it, but what's Ali's excuse? This is all super sus, but I think Ali lied about placing the order for the cake. Don't know why. Maybe she wanted to look like a good friend, but was too cheap to actually buy one. Maybe she likes Jerry and thinks OP is competition. Or maybe she just doesn't like OP, and this was some elaborate scheme to keep her from joining them for dinner. But whatever it is, OP said the first bakery she went to was the last place that Ali had travelled to using her maps. But then Ali claimed it was the wrong bakery and she'd just inquired about a cake there. So then, why was that the last place she went to? If she'd bought a cake already, why go somewhere else to inquire about one? Whatever the reason, I don't think this was an accident. Like, am I missing something here? Anyone else have any theories? Remember, I post new content every day, so subscribe for more juicy tea.